Right, Elizabeth, I think we are live and we're going to be welcoming our listeners and viewers in shortly. So, good evening, everyone. I'm interviewing Elizabeth Devlin for the second time in our six-part series of the Enneagram Introductory Series. As mentioned last week, Elizabeth has taught the Enneagram for well over 25 years. So she's a very experienced teacher. She's also an author. She was trained in not Elizabeth. She was trained in the Enneagram Professional Training Program overseas by the founders of that program, Helen Palmer, a psychologist, and Professor David Daniels, who is a psychiatrist and professor at Stanford University. So we're very excited. I'm very excited to welcome Elizabeth back for the second time this week. And if you've got questions, please post your comments or questions, and Elizabeth will answer them at the end. So welcome, Elizabeth. How are you today?
Thank you, Tanya, and viewers. I'm very well, thank you. And
That's
I hope
great.
you are.
Lovely. So, Elizabeth, what is the Enneagram? There seem to be so many variations and understandings of it. Could you lay a foundation for us?
Thank you, Tanya. Yes. Excuse me. I think there isn't one flat answer because the Enneagram is not two-dimensional. The Enneagram is multidimensional, multifaceted, and multi-contextual. So I tend to speak about the Enneagram as an arcanum. So to begin this adventure this evening, I need to ask, what is a healthy cosmology? And a healthy cosmology, according to Matthew Fox, who is one of my favorite authors, and his bit of a sidekick, Brian Swim, mathematician and cosmologist and physicist, and Rupert Sheldrake and Candice Pert, they all contribute to my worldview. But Matthew Fox states that a healthy cosmology has three aspects or three elements. The first element is we need a story from science, a story or a theory from science to tell us about the origins of our universe. We also need a mystical story to tell us about our origins and how we came to be alive in the universe. And then the third aspect is art. We need art because art forms the bridge. It bridges science and it bridges mysticism and creates an image. It creates an icon. It creates an arcanum in coded form, which incorporates science and incorporates mysticism. So the Enneagram actually is an arcanum. It is the art form that combines the two.
Thanks, Liz. So, as I understand it, you're saying the Enneagram then is this arcanum, a bridge between science and mysticism. Could you, that's such a strange word, arcanum. Could you maybe just flesh that out a little bit for us and give us an idea what that means?
Okay, well, I'm only going to touch on it lightly because it's very complex. But an arcanum, as it is known in sacred tradition, is a mysterious, densely encoded symbol. It moves from the cosmic, the macro, to the micro, and it may take many forms. An arcanum is a densely encoded symbol which can take many forms. It may be an image, it may be an icon, it may be a certain gesture, it may be a mudra, it may be anything that contains. A symbol is a container, an arcanum is a container, and it contains objective, metaphysical, mysterious information and knowledge. So that's what an arcanum is, and the Enneagram is an arcanum. Now, this, of course, is just to lightly touch on it, because when we start talking about it, I find that words obstruct a lot of understanding because they give the illusion of understanding. We think we've got something because we know the words, but actually we haven't. It's something that has to really settle in deeply in us.
Okay. Thanks. So you really, I mean, what you're saying is it holds a lot of complexity. It's not something that one can explain just lightly in a few words. So I think I'd like to then ask you, let's look at the word Enneagram itself. What does that mean?
Okay, the word Enneagram is comprised of two Greek words, Ennea meaning 9 and grammos meaning a graph or a diagram. So from a Greek understanding, the Enneagram is a 9-pointed star-like diagram, which is basically a map.
Okay.
And we could say an Enneagram because there are many understandings of it rather than the Enneagram.
Okay. All right. So you've mentioned the Enneagram as a map. Could you just explain a little bit about what you mean about that, the Enneagram as a map?
Would you like to show the map now, Tanya?
Yes, that is a good idea.
I'll explain it in those terms.
Here we go.
Okay, thank you. So a map. Let's look at the word. What is a map? A map is a resemblance or a detailed portrayal of something already existing. When we look externally, let's say at the map of Africa, we could say it's a map of the earth. We could map the heavens. We could map the seas. But the point is, and this is important, the point is a map has not been arbitrarily plucked out of somebody's brain. Old seafarers who navigated the seas, ancient tribes and pioneers who wandered new lands, a map was drawn from the experience of the travelers. And it's the experience that we want more than the knowledge and the information. So if the map is drawn from the experience of the explorers, the Enneagram then is an internal map that maps our internal territory. It is not about external behaviors. I think that's a point that needs to be said over and over again. The Enneagram maps our internal world. You cannot explain it by external behaviors.
Okay. So great. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for explaining that. I'll bring on the map again later when we talk more about the Enneagram as a map. I think just touching on what you've said about that it's not about behaviors. Those two students that you were speaking about last week, well, they were part of your corporate course that you were doing with the company on the Enneagram. You spoke about how they really got in touch with their inner landscapes, and it's not about what's going on externally. They really could explain beautifully from their own internal space. So let me just take you to the next question. Could you then go into a little bit more detail on how the Enneagram can be explored internally so that it makes sense to us today?
Okay, so the inner world was explored by pioneers who wanted to move beyond their known thought patterns. We know the process, our mind, the way our brain works. These people wanted to move beyond their known habitual textures and feelings. They wanted to move beyond their known habitual responses. And those ancient explorers were usually people who set themselves aside from society. They set themselves aside, so they would have been monks or nuns or priests or saints or sages across cultures, and this is really important, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, there has always been people who want to set themselves aside and explore their inner world. How does it feel to be me? And nowadays, we don't have to set ourselves aside. We can all explore our inner world if we spend 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day and just observe and map our own inner territory. And like I said last week, see what amazing beings we are. I remember David Daniels always used to say, explore and be amazed. So we need to map our own inner territory.
I like that a lot. But it's not easy, is it, Liz? We're being continually bombarded every minute of every day by external demands, by technology. I mean, most of us are now experts on Zoom, on online courses, on webinars. So our days are filled with technology and phone calls and external demands. So how do we, I think that's kind of my question. It's not easy. So what would you respond to that?
I think, again, it's about spending that time, spending 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day of quiet time and of just observing. Observation is a wonderful tool for inner work. And I like what John O'Donoghue said. He said, he's another of my favorite authors. He said, you walk into the soul with a candlelight. You don't walk in with neon light. He said, if you walk internally and just observe with gentle candlelight, all those shameful, anxious, those little shadows are able to come to the fore and be seen. But if we walk into the soul with a bright, shining neon light, all those little shadows move away. So just move inwards, and just look and map your own territory. And the Enneagram is a map of the inner world. And if you do an Enneagram course and come to understand yourself, you can observe your inner space. And it doesn't take an awful lot. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need anything. You just need to look and be amazed.
Yes.
The willingness, as you say, yes, the willingness.
Liz, I think what I want to, because I love this map analogy. So if we just go back to that, I'll bring up the map again. So if an external map articulates mountain ranges, rivers, deserts, plains, etc., the edge of the sea, what would an internal map offer? If we could just explore a little bit around that.
I like that question because that's quite an interesting question, and I see the answer like this. If you remember Sylvia's question,
I will. No.
Because I won't remember anymore. Okay, yeah. I see the answer like this. If we see this map, we can see the coastline. It already exists. We see that the Drakensberg Mountains are on the east coast of South Africa. We see the Namib Desert on the west coast of South Africa. We see what's termed the Garden Route along the bottom from Cape Town to the Eastern Cape, and we see the Karoo. It already exists, and it hasn't been demarcated by us. That's a strong point. The landscape itself demarcates the area. So the inner map was drawn by people who wanted to move beyond their known responses, as I said before. And they created an inner map that has been well documented in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Judaism, in many traditions, many philosophies, also psychology, also Winnie the Pooh. I mean, it's throughout our history, throughout our philosophies, throughout our traditions. It already exists. It's not something that's just been created. I think one of the most important things to remember is a map is a map. Bottom line. It doesn't tell you which way to go. It doesn't tell you that you should go to the desert or you should climb the mountains. You actually have a choice. If you want to climb that mountain today, you could do. My sons love climbing mountains. I prefer to go to the desert. So we go via the route that we choose. And if we want to go to the hell, which is a real place in the Hamkaskloof, it's a lovely word, isn't it? The Hamkaskloof. So as we explore our inner landscape, this is the point I'm getting to. As we explore our inner landscape, we are likely to discover the edge of our anxiety or fear. If we observe ourselves, we can look carefully. I'm beginning to feel anxious now. How interesting. Or we might say, I'm beginning to get irritated. So we can observe and see, there's a little bit of jealousy emerging, or sprinklings of deceit popping up, or maybe gluttony begins to arise, or our heart is overswelling with pride. We begin to observe all these things, and it's very important. And if we stick with that, and that's the whole point, don't stop. If we really stick with that, we will begin to feel the beginnings of empathy rising. And if we stay steady and follow that, we might reach compassion and mercy and the origin or the source of these qualities, let's say. So it's very important to stay steady and to just observe. And remember the candlelight. But if we move more gently and slowly with candlelight, we may discover pools of dedication and commitment. We may sit internally by gentle streams of peace and harmony and joy. It's all there. We just need to look. We may feel the beginnings of hope or faith or courage rise in us. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that amazing? To be, and then to climb mountains, and mountains of integrity, mountains of strength and courage and power and commitment, and then descend into valleys of awe and wonder. I think we should be exploring these paths and what it is that, what is going on inside us. I think it's marvelous, absolutely marvelous.
I love how you're describing this. I love how you're describing the inner territory, how it can really help to kind of allow people to understand and kind of go within, find the edges of those different feelings, find the edges of their intuition, their wisdom. And it sounds pretty much like an integrated process. So I think that's coming through very beautifully in how you are describing the Enneagram. So if someone were going to explore their inner map with the aid of the Enneagram, what could they hope to discover?
Okay, well, I think I would just say many, many, many things. Because the Enneagram internal map identifies very clearly 9 specific views or perspectives on reality. You know, we've all got 360 degrees of reality, but we have our own perspective. And I'm just seeing all these little things pop up. Hello, hello, hello to everybody.
Please reminder to ask questions. We will answer them, or Liz will answer them to be more exact at the end.
Okay. So what we find is that when we look internally, we can find our perspective on reality, which may be very different from my husband's or my children's. So we have 9 specific, well-mapped perspectives on reality, which offer us 9 specific values, 9 sensory or energetic understandings, and 9 upwellings of emotional intensity or emotional feelings. We all have these, and it's amazing how clear across race, color, creed, culture, gender, socioeconomic, education or not, these paths are so well trodden and so well known that they're actually clearly marked. And this is quite exciting to have all this verified. And another point that I want to say is you don't have to believe me or anybody or disbelieve. You can look for yourself. I think that's very important. We all need to explore ourselves. And then we can verify for ourselves. Sorry, Tanya. So to conclude that answer, what would I discover? Hopefully my true self, my true nature of being, which goes beyond all the other silly things.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. I think that's also very beautifully answered. I think it's important to note that these are 9 different patterns that you're talking about.
Yes.
But they're not necessarily. I mean, I think what I'm trying to get to is that there are many variations in people. So, how does the Enneagram account for that? Is it as simple as there just being 9 different worldviews?
I think, again, to come back to a very important point, that the Enneagram map is a map. How do we look at the map? So the point there for me is, if a climatologist looks at that external map, he will explain that map in terms of the territory and how the territory explains climate and climate changes. If a botanist looks at exactly the same map, he or she will explain it in terms of the flora and the plants that live in the area, the way they grow, what plants live where and why, according to XYZ. And a paleontologist looking at exactly the same map would explain the map in terms of the structure and the evolution of extinct animals. So you've got one map clearly defined, but our perspective on that map is according to our profession or our religion or whatever. So likewise, if a Christian looks at that map, they will explain the map in terms of Christianity. If a Hindu looks at the map, it's the same map. They can explain it very, very easily with the images of the Christian, of a Hindu understanding. If it's easily explained in Judaism, and psychology also has their own map. So depending on who is looking at the map, it will be explained in their professional capacity or their religious capacity or their traditional or cultural capacity. The map is the same, but depending on who is teaching the map will determine the differences. But it's a little bit like saying the map from here to Johannesburg is exactly the same. But just because you know the map does not mean that you know that you've been through the territory. You haven't got in your car and driven yet. You've actually got to take the map with you on your journey.
Yes, I like that analogy. So you've got to be aware because you might find yourself veering way off course. Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense because as you were talking, I was remembering, you know, for example, like a psychologist would look at the defense mechanisms, for example. So So what you're saying that depending on who is looking at this map, or it depends what you see even. You might not see it all.
Yes.
It depends on your willingness, like we mentioned earlier, and your awareness and wanting to explore that map. And it's a
Yes.
complex map. It's not easily kind of explained in a few words. It's by walking the walk. These people that you've spoken about, because this is a system that goes back thousands of years. People have
Yes.
walked, they've explored that map, so they know the territory. But for each of us, it depends on how we're walking into that internal space. Okay, I like that. So
And
let
can
me
I
get to
just
the next question. Yes.
add a little bit more? Just because you know the map, and you can study the map, and you can know it very clearly, but it doesn't mean that you know your inner territory. This is why language can confuse you. Because just because I know the map doesn't mean I know my inner world. Because lots of people misrepresent themselves and misrepresent others because they haven't done their inner work. So
True.
we've all got to do our inner work and our inner walk.
Yes. And then we can answer that for ourselves.
Yes.
we can compare it and be able to explain it ourselves. I love that, Liz. So it's definitely not about putting people into boxes, because there are, there's, as we said, there's many variations of, people from all across the world. However, those patterns are there, those worldviews are there, but it's about each person finding it for themselves. I see Elaine says, well said. Thank you, Liz. So, all right, so let's get to the next question. Okay, you've asked me to share the Enneagram diagram with the viewers. I'm going to bring that up, and hopefully we will see it shortly. Here we go. Could you explain a little bit about this diagram, Liz?
Okay, thanks, Tanya. Well, we see this arcanum or symbol. It has a circle with an inlaid triangle overlaid by a hexagram. So we always begin with the circle because it's the most ancient symbol known to man, I believe. So then I would ask, what does a circle, or I would ask in a class, what does a circle mean to you? So let me ask you, Tanya, what does a circle mean to you?
I think I would answer it that a circle for me represents inclusivity. It kind of represents everything that is, and it's quite a holistic image. I mean, I actually think of a wedding band as well when I think of so it's unity.
Unity. Yes, well, we've got unity, wholeness, completion. It's like the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Entirety, infinity, no beginning, no end. Balance, complete balance, completion. We'll all explain that circle very differently, and that in itself is important because the words that we use are our words. So I need to draw forth or lead forth from myself, which is true education, to bring out or lead out from myself what is my understanding. So we begin with the circle, then inside we have the triangle. A triangle again. Oh, something else I wanted to mention about the circle is it's also a zero. And a zero, what is zero? What does zero mean? In science, we've got zero, of quantum physics, we've got 0-point field. So there's the circle itself can be discussed ad infinitum. Then we've got the triangle, which again is throughout many traditions. From Christianity, you've got the Holy Trinity, and tri in Latin is three. In Hinduism, you've got the Trimurti. You've got the triune nature of being. You've got the nervous system, the three aspects of the nervous system. The Trinity goes on, or the triangle goes on forever. So again, I don't want to teach this because people come into classes, but it's something we do in classes. We discuss circles, we discuss triangles, we discuss them from within ourselves. What do they mean to me? And what is my triune nature of being? So as this forum is only an introductory forum, I don't want to go too deeply into that.
Wow, yes. That sounded very, very amazing and very interesting. So I think the next thing I'd like to ask, Liz, is that we've spoken about it in the first session. I mentioned, and you also spoke about it being the narrative tradition
Yes.
that you're trained in. Could you just speak a little bit about the different Enneagram programs? But there are more than just the narrative tradition.
Yes. Well, in all honesty, I've only experienced Helen Palmer and David Daniels in their narrative tradition, which I spoke last week, is called the EPTP, the Enneagram Professional Training Program. I believe the Integrative Enneagram, which I think is Russ Hudson's, I believe that also has a 4-part program, but I haven't experienced it, so I actually cannot comment on any of the programs because I don't know that one program is better than another. I really don't. One thing I would like to say perhaps is to ask the person who is facilitating the program, are they qualified? Have they completed their own courses for their own, not just for their own understanding? Have they got, what sort of accreditation have they got? I think that's really important because as a facilitator, we are walking in somebody else's soul. So we really need respect, compassion, and a willingness to listen and to really hear what the other person is saying from their perspective and not translate their perspective into mine, which an awful lot of people do. You know, I need to understand how you are to yourself, which is the 2 little stories that I spoke of last week. I think that's very important, you know.
Absolutely.
So full training is a long and often quite an arduous process because it takes self-observation, self-awareness, because we've got to look at our own hurdles and we've got to know our own biases because we've all got biases and most of them are unconscious.
Great.
So it's not for the faint-hearted.
No, I was just thinking that the journey begins with the first step, and
Yes.
depending on all of your willingness to kind of show up and kind of do the work and do the journey, the more will be uncovered. Great. I see quite a few questions. We're just over half an hour.
Okay.
To the viewers, I did try and persuade Liz to do an hour initially, and she said no, half an hour. So we're trying to keep it to half an hour because it's really an introduction. It's not classes.
Yes.
There are Enneagram teachers, and Liz is the one who went overseas and did the main training and then came back. So there are teachers that you can do this with. So this isn't, the intention is not to teach it. It's to kind of give you a taste of what the Enneagram is about.
Yes.
So I think, Liz, we're going to take a few minutes to answer some of the questions. Could I go back to, I think Sylvia was the first one who asked a question. It has been said that we are asleep to ourselves. What would help us to wake up? Good question.
Good question and an interesting question. I think it's always about self-observation and the walk going inwards. And what am I feeling?
Mm-hmm.
You never ask why, because David Daniels, I'll never forget it. He said, you will always and forever justify and rationalize why you did something or why you said something. So he said, never ever ask why. So it's like, what am I feeling? How does this feel for me? What is emerging? When would it emerge? These are the questions that I need to ask myself, but never why. So this would help me wake up, because I just need to look and observe. I think I always use, with my teachers and my classes, I use 4 tools. Self-observation. This is the hardest thing. And I say to go inside with a video camera, because a video camera does not comment. It doesn't say you've been here before. This is the 3rd time you've been angry today, or don't be so afraid. The video camera just looks. It doesn't comment. It doesn't criticize. So the first one is self-observation. The second tool is self-acceptance. And I think it was Carl Jung who said, that's a lifetime's journey, to accept yourself fully or completely. And accepting myself does not mean that I like what I feel or I like what I'm thinking. I just know it's a habitual response. I feel sad, it's habitual. Or I feel irritated, it's habitual. Or I feel anxious, it's habitual. Or I feel jealous. What is it that's going on? So I need to do my own mapping without judgment.
Right, so that's a lovely point that you've raised, Liz. So it's kind of, if we are aware of our emotional, what's going on inside us, without judging, that can also be a doorway in.
Absolutely.
To investigating more, without, as you say, without any neon lights, but with a soft, non-judgmental candlelight. Great. I'm going to just look for another question. I think there was another 2 that I saw. Okay, this one. Jennifer Scholz says, do we have a dominant tray or triangle, even if we feel like we can be each point?
Yes, we do. Because if we look externally, I don't want to make this too long, but if you think of what is inside an acorn, it isn't a miniature tree. What is inside an acorn is the pattern, the power, and the potential to become an oak tree. What is inside a mustard seed? The pattern, the power, and the potential to become that which I was designed and created to be. So yes, you do have a dominant point, most definitely. And your triad, from my perspective, your triad is, which I'll speak about at some stage, are the 2 pillars that support my prominent point. So yes, we do. And you can feel a little bit of everything around the Enneagram diagram, because we are, Candice Pert said that we're like flickering flames. And I like that. We are flickering flames. But what am I designed to bring to the world? And that is my prominent point.
Thank you, Liz. I hope that answered you, Jennifer. And I know in one of the future weeks, you're going to speak about those 2 pillars in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
We'll come to that shortly. There's another question here from Dawn Taylor. Is the Enneagram based on science?
I don't think the Enneagram is based on anything, because it's a map, and I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Well, I think you answered it based on that at the beginning in terms of the cosmology that you said it kind of bridges.
Thank you.
Maybe just speak to that a little bit more.
Okay. I think it's not based on anything, because we've got to have a story or a theory from science, which is flexible as our understandings change and new theories emerge. So there are stories of our origin from science, and there are stories from mysticism. And the art form bridges in coded form, and the coded form is the circle, the triangle, the hexagram. In coded form, the arcanum is the container of science and of mysticism. So it incorporates everything.
Yeah.
From quantum physics to macro to micro.
Great.
I hope that's helpful, Dawn.
I hope that answered that question, Dawn. Thank you for that question. There's another one here by Joan Peters. Once you know your Enneagram type, what then?
Aha.
Don't run around typing everybody else.
Thank you. Don't become an Enneagrammer. I think it's always about an exploration, Joan. Move inwards, find where you sit, and look for your greatest gifts and your greatest blessings. Why are you here? What is your job? What is your job on earth? Not your profession. What is your real job? Are you the bringer of faith? Are you the bringer of hope? Are you bringer of mercy and compassion? Are you the bringer of truth and justice? Are you the bringer of integrity? What is the quality that you bring to the earth? And I want to go a little bit farther with that and say, you are that quality. It's not that you bring faith or hope or truth, and you don't bring it. You are it. And that's quite a thing to get our head around.
Wow, that is very interesting, Liz.
Yes, it is.
I hope you're whetting everybody's appetite to go and find out a little bit more. So I think we've now on over our 10-minute period. Are there any more questions? I'm going to just put it out there. If anybody wants to ask anything else, I think we've got time for one more question. Otherwise, Liz, I think, well, maybe that somebody's thinking of a question. Could you maybe give us a little bit more information about next week? What will you be sharing with us about the Enneagram?
What am I doing next week? I'm doing the head, the heart, and the body as organs of perception. The brain, the heart, and the gut as organs of perception. How does this work? What are we perceiving? When are we perceiving? And what are we drawing in? And what are we transmitting? So I will touch on that. Again, I don't want to give off too much information because I feel it's unfair to my teachers who are teaching the Enneagram. So I'm trying to keep it introductory.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so I think we've come to the end of our discussion. There are no more questions. Thank you to you, Liz. Thank you for sharing more about the Enneagram today. This is our second part, as I said, of a 6-part series. So we've got Liz for another 4 weeks. Just each week, just exploring a little bit more about what this complex subject of the Enneagram is all about, so that we could, I love how you expressed that, Liz, about becoming more self-aware, observing more deeply, and bringing some more compassion to ourselves, self-acceptance and compassion.
Yes.
So thank you. I think you've really shared amazing things with us today, and we look forward to hearing about many more. Thank you. Enjoy. You. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. Thank you to everybody who asked questions.
Thank you to the listeners.
We thank you for your support. Thank you. Till next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.